Front office structure. Now that you understand what the front office is and why it is important, you need to become orientated to how you as a department fit into your establishment as a whole. Once you have a solid understanding of the front office structure, everything that you learn from now on will have a sense of place. You'll become orientated to the front office structure through the organizational chart and shift structures. Let's begin by looking at the organizational chart. Your establishment may have a large number of staff who will all be responsible for different areas of work. As there is a need to coordinate the activities of the different staff and departments, it is very important to understand your duties and responsibilities within your department of front office. Equally important is understanding how you and your work fit in with the rest of front office and the other departments. The way in which this flow and hierarchy can be illustrated is by using a diagram called an organizational chart. Now let's look at an example of an organizational chart of the front office department for a medium-sized property. You can clearly see here how the different positions within front office interlink with each other. When the relationships between the different positions in front office interlink correctly, the daily flow of the department will run smoothly throughout the day. You will notice that within the front office organizational chart, the housekeeping department is reflected too. We'll go into more detail about your relationship with housekeeping later on in the course. When starting out in front office, it is important to be familiar with the organizational chart of your entire establishment too, so that you have a clear understanding of who everyone is and what role they play within your establishment. This is an example of what a typical organizational chart may look like. Your manager will go through your establishment's organizational chart with you when you begin in the front office. Now let's look at your front office shift structures. When you start any new job, you will need to know what time you are expected to start work, what time you finish work, and what days of the week you are expected to work. Because you work in the hospitality industry, and your guests are your focus, your roster and shifts will be very different from those of someone working in the corporate world, who might only work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. There are several key points that you need to know when it comes to your front office shift structures. They are days of operation, hours of operation, rostered days off, the open and close shift, and why front office operates for such long hours. Firstly, let's begin by looking at days of operation. As your establishment's primary focus is to look after guests and create memorable experiences for them, you will be expected to be available across a 7-day week. This doesn't mean that you will be expected to work 7 days in a row, but you should be prepared to work over weekends or any other day of the week as needed. Next, we'll look at hours of operation. The hours of operation will vary from establishment to establishment, but a 40 to 44-hour work week is generally what is expected from front office staff in different countries worldwide. Depending on the size of your establishment, you will have 4 or 5 shifts overlapping with each other during the day. An example of what these shifts could be is this: the day shift, from 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. The mid shift, from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. The late shift, from 3 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. And the night shift, from 11 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. Each shift will include a 30-minute break that your manager will allocate you to have at a particular time. Your breaks won't necessarily be during the normal meal times, so make sure you eat a good meal before coming to work. Your manager and colleagues won't want you fainting from hunger in the office, or even worse, in front of guests. These traditional work hours for front office will vary depending on your policies and procedures and how busy your establishment is. A roster of flexible hours allows your manager to change the roster depending on the business needs. Therefore, the time that the different shifts start will depend on what the business's needs are. Let's take a look now at your rostered days off. Before you start working in the front office department, your manager will clearly explain how your rostered days off will work. This will again vary from establishment to establishment. Your establishment will also have procedures that you need to follow if you want to put in a request for a day of annual leave or a specific shift on a certain day. Make sure you understand what is expected of you from your manager in terms of your rostered days off. You don't want to arrive at work on a day that you aren't expected to be there, and you certainly don't want to miss a day's work that you are meant to be there, leaving your colleagues to do your work for you. Your roster will be issued to you either a month or 2 weeks in advance. Always be prepared for changes to your roster. The reason for changes to your roster could be because of many reasons: an increase in the number of guests arriving or departing, sick colleagues, or a last-minute conference or function that gets booked in. Remember, in hospitality, no day will be the same, so be prepared for your roster to change often. Now it is time to look at the open and close shift. The front office department should have a staff member responsible for opening the office and a staff member responsible for closing the office at the end of the day. If your establishment runs a 24-hour reception desk, instead of having staff opening and closing the office, you will have a constant flow of staff handing over to one another throughout the day. If your establishment does have a staff member performing the open shift and a staff member performing the close shift, this is something you will be trained to do at a time that your manager deems appropriate. And lastly, why front office operates for such long hours. Front office is operational for such long hours because you are there to look after guests and exceed their expectations at all times. Imagine how many guests you would disappoint if the front desk was only operational from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. This is often an industry standard, and keeping someone at front desk to tend to guest requests and queries is essential to the operation of the establishment. Now that you know how you and your department fit into your establishment, as well as having a clear understanding of your shift structures, you should be feeling comfortable with your front office structure. Well done on completing this lesson.